Hey, deserving listeners, 90 Day Fiancé, let's watch. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. As I always say, everything that I say in reaction to all these shows is completely speculative based on very little information that not only the cast members deem to show us, but also the producers deem to edit for us. Keep that in mind. Let's watch.
What should we call her when she, enters the house?
I don't know. What do you want to call her?
Shaeeda.
You can call, you call her
She has nicknames.
Shaeeda. If you want to give her a pet name or something, something kind of cool, fly, kind of comes off your tongue really nice.
Like butter.
This is good. So he's having a conversation with his kids before his fiancée arrives, and they're asking, what do we call her? Kids, they are concerned about things like that because they're thinking, well, she's like mom, but I don't want to call her mom. So having those conversations are important, and he's saying, it's up to you. You can call him. You can call her by her name. You can call her by a nickname. Whatever you want. Meaning, you don't have to call her mom if you don't want to.
It's up to you guys. Whatever you're comfortable with.
Okay.
Obviously, she's not your mother, so she'll never be your mother. Your mother's your mother. I don't think she'll come in and mess up any of the synergy that we have.
Now, I hope that Bilal has talked with Shaeeda about this issue. I keep looking at my notes to make sure I get the names right. Because it sounds like he's saying, I don't think she's going to come in and mess up our vibe. And, I'm just going to take a guess and say that she won't. But these are important things to talk about prior to inviting essentially a step-parent into the house. I'm guessing the kids have visitation. They live in different homes. And so... joint custody kind of a thing, split custody. And so you would want to, we use this as a jumping off point. You want to have elaborate conversations, and they have to be dictated by the biological parent or the primary parent, because the new person coming into the household, if they've never had kids before, if they've never met the kids before, they don't know what the rules are. And so Bilal is the one who sets the tone. Obviously, he works with Shaeeda they have equal power in the relationship, but in terms of parenting, it's recommended that you go through a phase where he is the one that is seen as the primary parent to the kids. And there's a lot of different styles. There's a style where Shaeeda is never an authority over the kids. The kids are pretty old by now, so that could be a part of that. If the kids were 2 years old, it wouldn't be recommended. It'd be hard to be a step parent and to just always defer to the other person. But by the time they're this age, you can get away with that kind of stuff as long as Bilal has the capacity to take on all the roles, the main roles of being a parent. Or on the other end of the spectrum, Shaeeda becomes a fully fledged parent with all the pros and cons that come along with it, that you have to have all the authority, you have to participate in the discipline, you have to have a lot of the guidance responsibilities to the kids, along with all the love and all the closeness and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of range there, but you have to talk about it, and there are different phases to it. So I don't know if we're going to see a depiction of that, but I'll just give my blanket statement that I always say, which is when we have kids on reality TV shows, of course, you have them sign a contract. We understand that the kids have to consent, or at least the parents have to consent on the kids' behalf. And the question that I ask y'all is, at what age do we believe that an individual knows what they're actually consenting to when they consent to being on a reality TV show? You could argue that by the time they're 16, maybe, they know what they're getting into. I would play it safe and say, well, let's say 18. And I guess that leads to a larger issue. Perhaps we might initiate laws, and maybe there already are, I doubt that there are, that these shows actually have to disclose to the participants the risks of actually coming on the show, and maybe even provide a training that would help people understand really what they're getting into. For example, in my field as a therapist, there's a contract of sorts that patients, clients will sign, indicating that I have disclosed information to them. They need to know my background, my education, my approach, They need to understand my confidentiality requirements. They need to understand my, records process. There's a set of rights they need to be aware of. They need to know where they can complain about me. There's a number of different disclosures that they have to know before they engage in therapy with me, and they need to sign a form indicating that they understand those things. And I have to explain a lot of those things verbally to them when we first begin therapy. 90 Day Fiancé usually depicts these kids in ways that don't make them look bad, right? That's not usually the point of these shows. They're not likely to be bullied, but who knows, right? We're starting to see another risk with Darcy's kids. Aniko, the older one, is starting seemingly at a young age. I think she's like 16 years old, already getting into the whole thing of social media and whatnot. People are sending me posts, and I don't know the credibility of it, but that she's getting into altering she's having procedures done to change how she looks, similar to the way her mom and aunt are doing. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but it is a big red flag for someone having a very twisted set of values and ideas of themselves and vulnerabilities, not only to bullying online, but hypersexualization that could happen to kids online. So and I'm not going to say it's wrong, because I'm sure a lot of times it's fine, but it's just a huge risk. And I just wish that these shows would just not do this. I just wish they would. It's nice to see this scene because I can say that's good to have, but I'm always like, the risk is too high. Let's just concentrate on the adults.
Do you think your prank could backfire?
I don't think so. I'm hoping that she'll find it funny. But since the divorce, trusting has been very hard for me.
All right, so he is going to pick up Shaeeda from the airport, and he's been talking about that he is worried that Shaeeda might be in it just for the money, just for his money. And he has been, to date, they've been video conferencing for 2 years because they haven't been able to see each other due to COVID. And he says that he FaceTimes with her in front of a blank wall on the floor in his nice house because he wants to hide his house and his wealth, indications of his wealth. And so, that'd be hard to do, right? To date for 2+ years and never talk about where you're at in terms of that sort of thing. And also the fact that you've never talked about it and you're planning on getting married. So I understand the impulse of like, well, I want her to love me for me, and I don't want her to love me even in part because of my money. Okay, totally. But I think this illuminates a common observation that I have, or speculation, that when people are dating over video, there's only a certain level of intimacy it can rise to. Then, of course, they meet in person, and then they make all these decisions based on that experience, and then they meet in person, and all hell breaks loose. Now, maybe they'll be fine, but I think we can say, because they've only had, I think, a week or two in person, so I think we can say that their relationship has progressed, but only to a certain point, and then once they're together, it's going to have the opportunity to explore brand new areas. But anyway, so he's saying he's having a prank with her, that I think this is one of his houses that he might be selling or something. And so he's going to act like it's his house and bring her to this house that doesn't look as nice as his house. And he's saying he's doing this because he has trust issues. All right. So we use this as a jumping off point. A lot of us have been harmed in the past and thus have quote unquote trust issues, meaning that experience has told us that we should be careful before trusting people, and people might hurt us, people might betray us, they might cheat on us, they might lie to us. If this is actually some sort of test to see if she still loves him, I get the impulse, but it's also a violation to her of her trust in him to play a prank. And this is why I don't ever do April Fools. In fact, years ago on the podcast, my co-host Umberto on the audio podcast, he was an admin on our Facebook page, our official Facebook page. I don't know how long ago this was. I don't know, 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. And he, without asking me, which is fine because, he's part of the podcast sort of team, played an April Fool's joke on April 1 and posted a post that was an official post. It wasn't from him. It was an official post by Psychology in Seattle, because he's posting as an admin of the page, saying that the podcast was going to end, that it was going to be canceled. And it was, he was saying he was sorry. And he claims that he had clear indications in the post that it was a joke, but it was not clear. And so I wake up in the morning and I'm just going along with my day, and I think my wife actually called me or talked to me or something, and I think my wife Stacy actually came to me and she's like, "Did you see this post on your page? Because everyone is freaking out about it." And I'm like, "Huh?" And I check and there's this April Fool's, and I'm like, and at first I thought someone hacked into our account. And there were all these comments of people saying, "Oh no, like what happened? We don't want the podcast to end." And there were a couple people that were like, "Oh, this must be an April Fool's joke." But most of the people did not think of it that way. I think because they don't think of me as playing that kind of a joke, and I would never do that. April Fool's jokes, within reason, are, I think, fine, but they can really damage people's trust in you. Playing pranks of any kind. This is why I just never, there's other ways to make people laugh. There's other ways to have fun. Risking completely ruining someone's trust in me, like if with my wife, she's very prone to jump scares. Like if I jumped out at her from behind a door or something, it would freak her out, and it would be funny, I guess. And so if I wanted to, I could prank her in that way. But do I want her to consider me and our home to be a place of danger and lack of safety? Now, you might think your partner is not going to be damaged by that, but some people are. And people were damaged by that thing. And that afternoon, I stripped Umberto of his admin privileges on the Facebook page because I wanted him to participate on the online conversations, but I did not want him to act as an official spokesperson because he showed that he did not have judgment regarding what is safe to do and what is within reasonable limits. And so anyway, and since then he's never had official admin privileges on any of the things, even though in the beginning he absolutely did. In the beginning he ran all the social media and the website and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, and for the most part, and he learned his lesson. He felt really bad about it. So me and my wife have been together for a lot of years. I trust her more and more every year because I have a track record, and they do not. They have not had a lot of time in person, and so it's natural for Bilal to not trust. That's why relationships take time. And you just have to accept that you don't have data enough to trust someone, and just say, I'm just going to have to wait and see because I don't know. I don't have enough data. And two, you have to consider what kinds of things you can. So maybe something you can do that would be functional is to have a conversation and just be like, so I'm having trouble trusting you about money. Tell me about your values. Do you really love me? Can you convince me that you really love me independent of my money? How would you feel about things if I didn't have money or I lost all my money? Would you still want to be with me? What do you like about me that's independent of the, you can have a conversation, but someone could lie. And that's why you just have to say, it's a question mark until I have 5, 10, 20 years under my belt that I can actually depend on to draw conclusions of trustworthiness.
I think it's a testing ground just to see that if I lived here, would you still want to be with me? Would you want to help build something with me versus just coming to something that's already existing? Shaeeda's always been saying that she'll be willing to live under a tent long as it was next to me.
All right, so you've had those conversations before, and do you think she's lying? Because essentially that's another message you might be sending if you play this prank, is that you thought she was lying this whole time. It sends a really destructive message, which I would not recommend doing.
Wow, home sweet home, right? Let's see if that's really the case.
My name's Emily. I'm 29 years old and I live in Salina, Kansas.
Good girl.
Interesting. Half of my family, my mom's ancestors, come from Salina, Kansas. My ancestors were in Kansas for like 100 years in Salina, from like the mid 1800s until my mom was born in Salina in the 40s, and then they moved to Spokane, Washington. My parents met in Spokane, and then my parents moved to Seattle.
But Kobe's a good one. He's the one who's going to break it.
I hope so. In my early 20s, I definitely didn't have a very good self-worth. So I would just like hook up with guys. I went for like the bad boys. I mean, 2 of my exes are incarcerated.
All right, so we're learning, she's saying about her personality that she didn't have very good self-worth. So does that mean she's recovered and she has more self-worth now, or sufficient self-worth now, or does she still struggle with that? I guess we might find out or see some signs of that. We'll keep an eye on that. And she's also saying that I, as a result of having low self-worth, would hook up with a lot of guys, and I dated a lot of, I think she said, bad boys, and 2 of them are incarcerated. Now, on the surface, of course, what people will say is like, well, yeah, you have low self-worth, you will be promiscuous, and then you will date the wrong people, and you reap what you sow. But there are very loose connections between those things. Low self-worth and promiscuity are not necessarily related. You can be called promiscuous from the outside. And what is promiscuous really, right? But you can, according to cultural standards, be promiscuous and have high self-esteem or low self-esteem. So you could even argue that people with high self-esteem might actually be deemed promiscuous from the outside because they feel like they are okay enough with themselves that they live the life that they want to, regardless of how culture would judge them. So I don't want to connect, as I think she is, or at least the show is, promiscuity with low self-esteem. Can promiscuity, culturally speaking, be connected to low self-esteem? Sure. But like I said, we don't want to, especially when we look at women, we don't want to say, oh, she's promiscuous, she must hate herself, because that basically has an underlying premise that women who have sex with more than a couple people a year are humiliating themselves, and that's ridiculous. Sex is something that people do for fun. It's something that people do to relate to others, to bond, and there's no judgment or value association with that. And then she's saying, because low self-esteem, promiscuous, I have previous partners that are incarcerated. Again, we don't want to draw that connection between stigmatizing even incarcerated people. We don't know. Can someone who is incarcerated be a very bad person, according to what culture would say? Sure. They might even be a psychopath. They are irresponsible. They harm other people. They don't have remorse. They are chronically and serially criminal and uncaring towards other people. Certainly some people who are incarcerated are like that. Many people are not. People are incarcerated for having weed on them a few times. And we understand that's ridiculous, especially now that it's legalized. So it's like, what's wrong with our society and our government that we would do that? So just because someone is incarcerated doesn't mean anything. The other thing is even if someone had committed a violent crime, it doesn't mean that they haven't changed. It doesn't mean that they weren't triggered in the moment. It doesn't mean that they didn't deserve what they got, but it doesn't mean that we just write them off as like a bad boy or someone that you shouldn't be with romantically. So we want to disconnect those two things as well, that, low self-esteem, promiscuity, I didn't respect myself, I hooked up with a lot of people, and 2 of my previous partners are incarcerated. So I don't like how this is toned right now, because there's a number of stigmatizations that are happening right now that we don't want to have. All right, well, if you want to support what we're doing here, you can watch these videos, which actually does help me because the ads and that kind of thing. But the other way you can help is by becoming a patron of the podcast. There's a link below. Go to patreon.com. If it weren't for the patrons, I would not be able to do any of this stuff. Well, maybe a little bit of it, but not nearly as much as I do. So if you want to support and you like what we're doing here and you want to keep us moving down the road, become a patron of the podcast. We go on to patreon.com. We get an email every time someone signs up, and it warms my heart. Also, to you patrons, thank you so much. Really, 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 really. I know it's a lot of effort. It's a little bit of money, and it's a big deal, and I'm honored that people are patrons. If you could become an upper tier patron and or an annual patron and an annual upper tier patron, then that even helps us even more. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.